And now it is my pleasure to welcome to the pulpit our very own Joe WolfArth, a longtime member, pardon me, of this congregation, currently serving as Board of Trustees Vice President and a member of the Worship Committee. He first came to our church in 2002 and has been a dedicated volunteer since 2005. Joe possesses a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and has worked for decades in the social services field as well as in retail sales. Joe describes himself as an artist, astrologer, griot, am I saying that right?
Griot, yeah.
Griot. Historian, poet, singer, spiritualist, storyteller, tarot card reader, and writer, all of which keeps him very busy. So please welcome Joe WolfArth.
I want to preface with a short apology. We had planned for me to speak with Earth Day coming up on Wednesday some while back. And my dropping the ball was that I didn't make sure that what I was preparing was what matched what it says on our website and in our weekly invitation, which says that I'm going to give a presentation on how human beings have celebrated the resurgence of new life and the return of springtime for over 5,000 years, which we have, and which I'm all in favor of, and I'd love to hear that presentation, but it's not what I prepared. So please forgive. If that's heartbreakingly disappointing, I invite you to use the escape hatch and go out into the nature and commune directly with nature, which is why there aren't more people in this room today, because we have members who say, for example, I connect with nature when I go to the beach. And I say, yes. That's why we drum there under the full moon as often as we can make it happen. So yeah, please do connect with nature. And if you are one of those people, you're still sitting here, so I guess you're not. I was going to say, come back when you hear us singing again. Springtime, the time of year when dormant, dead appearing nature gives way to intense greening, when flora and fauna regenerate and reestablish their primacy in the landscape, is heralded around the globe, and historically gave cultures everywhere reason to celebrate new life. The ancient Greeks wrote into their religion the story of a goddess, Persephone, held captive underground in the land of the dead, now returned to bring flower and consequently fruit to the ecosystems above. Today we know that in the southern hemisphere, where seasons are reversed, the greening is happening while our regions north of the equator experience autumn. Spring landscapes become colorful as green leaves and flowers, like the cherry blossoms of Japan, proliferate. Animals mate and the landscapes become noisy with activity. Birds nest. In Florida, as a friend pointed out to me at the Unitarian Fellowship of South Florida, when I was living down there in Hollywood, Florida in 2000, people who are transplants from places where seasonal change is more dramatic will sometimes state that we have no seasons here. But that is a grave mistake. The reality is that the seasonal changes become less obvious, more subtle, the further one moves to the south. Here in Volusia County, I grew up knowing that autumn would be subtle. Florida winter, as I like to call it, could see cool breezes give way to chilly nights, cold winds, frost that finally offered deciduous trees and shrubs a chance to drop their leaves and take a long-awaited rest. And springtime meant the golden sun would encourage oak trees to drop their little yellowish pollinators, their catkins, to which some folks are very likely to experience an allergic reaction. A couple of years ago or so, the oak trees that shade my home were extremely active in regards to this, as they were this year. I swept vast amounts of these little catkins from the concrete patio behind my apartment and raked them into our dirt driveway over and over. I even dreamt about it. In my dream, I was setting up to celebrate spring, to have a little festival where I live. We had folding tables like the ones our church has, and we had set up these tables and we had tablecloths. And I can't remember whether in my dream they were cloth or just plastic ones from the dollar store, but I kept shaking this tablecloth, and every time I shook it loose, more of these catkins would fall out of the oak tree, and I would shake it, and the catkins would fall, and I would shake it. And finally, I exclaimed my displeasure, and my friend, who is someone I know in my waking life, her name is Wally. She's an astrologer in Holly Hill, as I am. She came to me because she had been helping me set up for our celebration and said, "Why are you upset?" And I said, "Well, the tree, it keeps dropping these little caterpillar looking things and I can't get this shaken free and they keep dropping." And she said, "But Joe, don't you know, springtime, the revival of the seasons, means more to these oak trees than to anyone. And doing what they're doing is how they participate in our celebration of spring." And for me, it was the moment I just kind of went, "Don't? Of course." So she said, "Yeah, thank them for their participation. They're at least as excited about this as we are." And that dream was vivid in my mind when I woke, and I didn't get the chance to share it with Wally for about a year or more. When I did finally see her and told her about it, she said, "Gosh, you know what? I'd like to think on my best day, when I'm really at my best self, that I would answer that way. That I would say, oh yeah, the nature wants to participate in our celebrating its return to green. Of course it does." And then a thing happened that I was here last month in March, and the beautiful rabbi came who runs the food bank in Ormond Beach, and his wife Loretta was here with him, and we set up for a service outside, and we had a beautiful service right outside last month. And at the end of that, we had our coffee station, if you will, set up on these beautiful picnic tables that we possess. And I went over and I said, "Oh no, all the coffee cups have been used." And Miss Loretta, the wife of the rabbi, said, "No, no, here's one that hasn't. Wait, wait." And she shook something out of the coffee cup, and I said, "Oh, is there a bug in it?" Not that I was afraid. She said, "No, no, one of those things that falls from the tree that looks like a caterpillar." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." "Well, ma'am, I guess I should tell you about my dream." So I told Ms. Loretta about my dream of the catkins. And then within a couple of days, because that was Sunday, so within a couple of days, I was at my job. I work at an assisted living facility for people with developmental disabilities in Daytona Beach, and I park under a great big oak tree every day. There was a big, big, big rainstorm, and it was pouring. It was cats and dogs. And when I came out, because my shift ends at 11 p.m., I got to my vehicle and saw that it was entirely festooned in the catkins from the oak tree, which were draped all over it. Literally, it was just festooned with these which had become waterlogged and sodden and fallen out of the tree. And I thought, man, it's 11 something at night. I am not dealing with this now. Just going to deal with it tomorrow. Well, the next day, I was spending time with my friend Lonnie, and my friend Lonnie said, "What happened to your car? It's all covered in, what is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's those little things, catkins. They fall out of the oak trees." And I know why it happened, because I told that story, and the fairy folk heard me, and the oak trees and the fairy folk are laughing outrageously that my vehicle has been thus festooned. The next day, I made it my business to get the hose and give that car the best washing ever. Man, my vehicle was just gleaming. And then about another day and a half later, there was a big windstorm. And the windstorm again sent festoons of catkins to lie atop my vehicle. And all I could do was laugh. And thank the oak trees for participating so vicariously. So, no, I'm the vicarious one. They're participating so vivaciously in my life. Thank you, oak trees. All I could do was laugh. But I knew that since the wind had blown the catkins and they weren't soggy and waterlogged, all I had to do was drive really fast and maybe they'd blow off, and they did. So I had to share that because this is the direct interaction. The direct interaction. Where I grew up in my neighborhood in Holly Hill, just over half an hour north from New Smyrna, I grew up knowing that clover, ubiquitous clover, would also herald springtime. And we could always count on its appearance around St. Patrick's Day, filling a vacant lot near my home, which had sat empty since the cottage that had been there burned the year I turned 12 or so. You could lie down in this clover field and disappear, which I loved growing up. It surrounds the house I grew up in, Clover, where I again live now, and like those catkins, it marks the seasonal change until it's gone. This year, I saw a few stray twigs sticking out from a shelf full of sundry and various items above my washer, which is outside of my kitchen door under the roof overhang. That's where the washer and dryer are. On closer inspection, I discovered it was a bird's nest after I plucked out a twig and realized it had been part of an entire construction, because it didn't just come out, it was stuck. I thought this bird's nest must be abandoned. Who would build a nest so low, vulnerable to invasion by a stray cat, raccoon, or other creature? Until one day recently, as I was doing laundry, I reached for something on that shelf and I was startled because something burst past me at full speed. And then I realized a bird had exited the nest, which gave me absolute chills. Several years ago, members of this church held a fine and well-attended picnic-style meal at a place in Port Orange on Spruce Creek, which offered a boat ride that carried us along the waters of the creek itself. Our guide then informed us that in this part of Florida, spring happens usually in early February, when the first plants begin their cycle of regeneration and rejuvenation. He pointed out the resurrection fern clinging to the limbs of trees above that waterway. It appears dead and desiccated, and then it springs back to lovely green embodiment once there's enough warmth and water. And that's where it gets its name. He pointed out that the fauna, the wildlife, will take its cue from the flora, and then the creatures too play their parts. My family tree has roots in this particular corner of Florida that go back almost 150 years. So this is where I first felt the connection to nature as a child. And I feel that embrace of nature when poet Mary Oliver describes cat-tailed stalks blowing in the wind over water, or the song of mockingbirds. At that time, my soul says, yes, I have lived within this world. It is mine too. I grew up in a house begun in 1886 on Riverside Drive in Holly Hill, so I know cattails. I found a mockingbird nest on the ground once after a very severe storm, and there was a tiny little chick in the nest. So, what was I to do? I was a teenager, and I had found a tiny bird vulnerable. I took that chick to my room, and I tried to feed it peanut butter. My mom discovered my plan, and she insisted I take that tiny bird out. I brought the little birdie to our back roof, which was nearly flat. To my great surprise and my joy today, the mother bird came and scolded me. Baby bird listened to the mama and then tottered to the edge of the roof, which was terrifying because I thought, now you're going to fall off the roof and die. And that bird then, tiny as it was, took flight, apparently for the very first time, which I got to be witness to. And then my mom got me a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, which was one of her favorite books and would become a favorite of mine. In fact, over the years, we watched the movie every time it came on television. I didn't know that it was illegal to molest a mockingbird, so I could have been arrested for rescuing the nest with the chick. Um, so yeah, our family roots extend here to the 1880s when my maternal ancestors first arrived in the Sunshine State. So to me, loving nature and being a part of nature and Gaia, the great Mother Earth who feeds and comforts us and gives us shelter, is just in my blood. And it comes from here because this is where we landed. Far away Sweden was the point of departure. Times were hard in Scandinavia. Word spread that opportunity was ripe, literally, in central Florida. Orange groves offered abundant work for any who could help pick and process the fruit crops. A cousin wrote in a letter to my great-grandmother's family who lived near Uppsala, Sweden's ancestral capital city. Stockholm is the new capital since it wasn't built until the 1500s. But Uppsala was the old capital that goes all the way back to the Viking era. And a cousin wrote, here in Florida, they say gold is falling from the trees because of the lucrative citrus industry. Work for a whole family. Come and see. And I will note that child labor laws did not yet exist. My great grandma was 4 years old at the time. Many years later, she would describe in a letter to her church, which she and great grandpa founded in Holly Hill. Among their friends and neighbors, they decided they wanted to build a church. And my great grandfather was a carpenter. So he built the house they lived in and he built the church, which is still in use today. It's near to the Holly Hill City Hall and it's called Greater Grace Chapel today. Many years later, she would describe, my great grandmother, her family's adventure as immigrants in a letter to the church. A naturally gregarious toddler, wee Sophia, my great grandmother, who I will note was born under the water sign of Pisces, had no fear of exploration and soon had the run of the ocean-going vessel that brought her family across the Atlantic. She described her mother, who had already experienced the joys and tribulation of raising numerous older siblings, as an extremely tolerant mother who put up with her gregarious nature. My great-grandma at 4 had the run of that ship. The ship's crew were friendly and permissive, maybe enchanted by the natural curiosity of a cute little kid, or maybe they missed their own kids. They showed her the hidden recesses of the big boat, even the engine room, like she was a tiny honored guest. She recalled her amazement at everything she saw and the wonderment of discovery that this journey across the ocean entailed. There was no Ellis Island yet at that time, so there was no mention in her letter of arriving in the New World. And I know now that in that era, one traveled to Jacksonville first and then would get on a steamship, which my grandmother described, that came south through the St. Johns River to your destination if you were coming to Central Florida, which they were. And they disembarked in Orange City. And why was it called Orange City? Because that's where the orange groves were. And that's where they were headed. Orange City in West Volusia, named for its abundant fruit crops. My wee little great-grandmother, to be, wore a dress with a pinafore apron, like you'd see on those little girls in the classic TV show Little House on the Prairie. She vividly recalled her family arriving at the orange groves. Ripe fruit was everywhere. And at that time, as I was told, in Sweden, if you weren't wealthy, you could give someone an orange for a Christmas gift because these were imported fruits that came from warm places, and you wouldn't find one anywhere in Sweden unless there was a big greenhouse, which was an expensive way to get an orange. So here were oranges everywhere. And great grandma was a little 4-year-old kid, and she was told, you can have all the oranges you can carry, just for you. So the tiny girl piled orange after orange into her pinafore's apron front, but burst out crying when she stumbled and tripped, causing her precious cargo to spill out and roll about on the grassy landscape. The adults laughed at me, she would recall, remembering a child's indignance at the disgrace. I will step back from this vignette to point out that by the 1880s, Our home state of Florida had become a well-established citrus growing locale, famed for the quality and quantity of the produce. In the northern U.S. and elsewhere, Florida's citrus was beloved and famed enough that many had traveled south to join the numbers of citrus growers and to live in the tropical paradise that they found in Florida. And that included Harriet Beecher Stowe, the writer of Uncle Tom's Cabin. After the Civil War, she sought a quiet, peaceful life surrounded by the orange groves of Florida, and she settled in the little town of Mandarin near Jacksonville, across the St. Johns River from Orange Park. Note again, Mandarin, Orange Park. Citrus was grown, and you named your place after what you grew. And for 17 years, she was a snowbird. And people would come to Florida, and she would welcome them to her tropical paradise in the winter. In Florida, so many places, Orange Park, Orange City, Orange County, so many places were named for our citrus industry. And many people that have grown up in the United States in the 20th century share a fond memory of traveling through our state in a vehicle, rolling down car windows to allow that sweet fragrance of the orange blossoms to enter their moving vehicle. And they knew then they had truly been transported to a magical place. What I want to say as a Florida native and a third generation Florida native is that we also have the long history of hard freezes or cold snaps, as my mama used to call them, which have killed off citrus trees, decimating groves. And the long-term effects of these climatic events have now pushed the citrus growing hotspots further and further south and west, closer to the warmer temperatures of Florida's lower Gulf Coast areas, further and further from stinging cold that can destroy citrus crops and kill once healthy trees. This is why these places still have orange in their name, even if there are not an abundance of orange groves there. Land development occurred and suburban-style housing sprang up in places where the citrus industry was leaving for more hospitable climes. When we talk about climate change, we need not only consider the warming trends, the increase in average temperatures, but also an increase that can happen in inclement weather patterns, storms, hard freezes, or whatever else may come. Loving Florida makes us want to celebrate Earth Day more because we see the value of the land and the joy that the land brings to us, both the wild and the cultivated land, and we want to protect it. How much human activity has contributed to climate change can be something that scientific minds will debate forever. But even in the 1880s, hard frosts would come that harmed the citrus industry, as my great-grandmother and her family would have told you, because they looked for new opportunities by 1900, which is what brought her here to Daytona. Another northern writer, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, would fall in love with our wonderful Florida landscapes and the amazing natural beauty to be found here. Her books that she wrote while living in Florida, including The Yearling and her memoir, Cross Creek, and many stories set in Florida, have inspired millions. When I was still a kid, my sister Sally loaded her most necessary items into a big backpack, hopped on her motorcycle, hugged our surprised, teary-eyed mother goodbye in the yard beside our house, and rode off to college. Sally was excited about her future, and I was excited too because I was going to get her bedroom, and it had its own bathroom, so I wouldn't have to go downstairs anymore in our old house to find a bathroom. This resulted later in my getting a chance to see what a college campus was like because Sally went to University of Florida in Gainesville, and she invited her invitation to mother and grandmother and I to take a road trip and go up there for the Gator Growl, which was very, very exciting that year. It was 1980. And I looked it up on the internet because, thank you, AI, we can do that now. I'm like, what year was that pep rally? The largest student-run pep rally was in October of 1980. And I will never forget my sister, who had played French horn and sousaphone in high school here in Daytona was in the University of Florida marching band, and she wanted us to come to Gainesville and see comedian George Burns and a very young Brooke Shields, who had just made a movie together a few months earlier called Just You and Me, Kid. And the other day, I actually watched that movie on the internet because I was researching for my presentation today. Burns was very funny, by the way. He was an old guy with a dry wit and genuine warmth, and we all felt it. It was palpable. He liked his co-star too. Never left the cigar, never left him. My grandmother, who had read Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' books, had learned that if we took the right route to Gainesville, we'd be passing close to the cottage in the backwoods hamlet of Cross Creek, where the author had penned her works, about the joyful solitude of living in a tiny community in the middle of nowhere in Florida, all while trying to keep an orange grove functional and productive. Rawlings learned that when the cold snap came, you had to put fires in the grove between the trees so they wouldn't freeze and the oranges wouldn't freeze. And if you ever watch the movie that was made from Cross Creek in the 1980s with Mary Steenburgen playing Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, you will see that they recreated all those elements. The eloquence of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' writing, combined with a folksy, hard-nosed sense for storytelling, made those Florida locales come to life, made the stories real, invited the reader into a very intimate world. What I discovered when we visited her farmhouse that year of 1980 was they told us, your timing is good because we're about to close the house for a time. We need to shore up all the foundations. So many visitors have come to this historic house over the years that they've weakened the floor. So we felt guilty that we were walking there. But they've done that, and now I can't tell you how many millions of people have seen the author's home, thanks to those efforts at preserving its structural stability, and it's actually a Florida state park, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' homestead. The house is open now to visitors, and you can see her typed manuscripts, the screen porch where the author typed them, ate her meals, even slept when hot weather called for it. Her words still evoke the primal joy one feels when a deep and meaningful connection with nature is achieved. Some things she wrote. We cannot live without the earth or apart from it. Something is shriveled in a man's heart when he turns away from it and concerns himself only with the affairs of men. I do not understand how anyone can live without some small place of enchantment to turn to. The wild animals seemed less predatory to him than people he had known. I like that quote. My grandmother would say that Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings was a product of her times and her upbringing, in that although she may have considered herself to be progressive, her friends included Mary McLeod Bethune and Zora Neale Hurston, Rawlings was not woke as we consider it today. And her writing has been criticized for her expressed opinions on people of color and poor whites in the South, which is why I think my grandmother would have defended her. Still, Rawlings valued the contributions of all the neighbors in her small community who strove to help each other through the Great Depression and the Prohibition years. She loved a good stiff drink, and she honored moonshiners in one of her books, South Moon Under. And I checked out a copy of Cross Creek from the library, knowing that I could still do that and I could remember why I fell in love with it after I toured that house. And it's just because of the eloquence of her expression of how deeply her felt connection to the nature around her became. Another creator who found solace among those orange groves near Gainesville was singer and songwriter Minnie Riperton. She developed her hit song Lovin' You from a lullaby she sang to her one-year-old daughter Maya, who you might know as comic actress Maya Rudolph of Saturday Night Live fame, when they lived in a house there, surrounded by orange groves and bird songs and sunshine. And note these lyrics, stay with me as we grow old, and we will give each we will live each day in springtime. I want to leave you with the words that Rawlings used to close her memoir, Cross Creek, which I think are some of the best expressions. Who owns Cross Creek? The redbirds, I think, more than I, for they will have their nests even in the face of delinquent mortgages. And after I am dead, who am childless, the human ownership of grove and field and hammock is hypothetical. But a long line of redbirds and whippoorwills and blue jays and ground doves will descend from the present owners of nests in the orange trees, and their claim will be less subject to dispute than that of any human heirs. Houses are individual and can be owned, like nests, and fought for. But what of the land? It seems to me that the earth may be borrowed, but not bought. It may be used, but not owned. We are tenants and not possessors, lovers, not masters. Cross Creek belongs to the wind and the rain, to the sun and the seasons. To the cosmic secrecy of seed, and beyond all, to time. Couldn't put it better. And here we are in this paradise called Florida. Let us love it, preserve it, protect it. Let's keep this tradition going. Thank you.